We're talking today with Fred Shuttleworth of Tucson, Arizona. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Fred, begin at the beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Washington, D.C. In 1949.
Okay. And did you grow up there or did you move around?
No, I grew up there. I was there entirely until I got drafted.
Okay.
And which is voluntary.
And what did your family do for a living when you were a kid?
My mom was, of that era, a housewife. Mm-hmm. And my father worked for Western Electric, which was a subsidiary of Bell Telephone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see, how many kids were in the family?
I had an older brother and a younger sister.
All right. And did your father serve in World War II?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, when do you finish high school?
I finished in 1967.
Okay. And what did you do after high school?
Went to community college.
Okay. And did you complete 2 years there, or?
No. I was not a good high school student, but it's like, what do you do after high school? You continue on with your education. So I went to a local community college as an art major, which I enjoyed. I liked the art part. I wasn't into the, the history and English and all that. My grades were poor. And I could see the writing on the wall that if I got out of community college, I knew that the draft was looming over my head. So I gave it deep thought and decided, well, it's my future. I just soon get it over with, then let it come to me. So I went down to the draft board. I asked them how long it would be if I volunteered for the draft. And they said, oh, we'd probably get you within a month. And they were correct. I went ahead and volunteered, and within a month I got my notice. And I was off to Fort Benning for my, or not Fort Benning, excuse me, Fort Bragg, North Carolina for my basic training.
Okay. Now, at this point in time, how much did you know about Vietnam?
Zero. I was extremely naive. I mean, you know, you couldn't help but know that in 1967, Vietnam was a big story. Mm-hmm. It was on the news every night. Yeah. But unlike a lot of young people my age who understood all the weapons and all this kind of stuff, I was really naive. And ultimately, I ended up in mortars, and I had no idea what a mortar was. Just kind of go with the crowd and figure it out.
Okay. Now, of course, in D.C., you would have also seen political, or been aware of political demonstrations and the anti-war movement, things like that going on?
I didn't see it in '67.
No, I'm talking about, but you don't go into the service until '69.
Right.
But so '68 was a pretty tempestuous year.
Yeah.
And
I was more aware of the race elements than I was the Vietnam War. I mean, there were some protests, and truthfully, in 1969, by the time I got there, it was not cool to be a service person. Right. I mean, with, you know, the 60s, long hair and all this kind of stuff, and you've got the buzz cut, you stood out.
Absolutely.
I never felt the animosity necessarily, basically because I was cloistered in the military.
Yeah. Okay, so you're not too aware of all of that stuff. You just know it's your job to go and let's just go do this. Okay, so when do you get to Fort Bragg?
I was at Fort Bragg in May of 1969. I did my basic there.
Okay. And you had done a physical before that?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you do the physical in D.C.?
Yeah. Well, as soon as you turn 18, you're required to go for a physical.
Okay.
And I was bussed over to Fort Hollibard in Baltimore for my physical and passed. I had huge issues with my knees. I've got they call it a disease. It's the way the joints are formed. But that did not stop me being classified as 1A.
Right. Did you notice anybody there trying to scam the system or get out of being drafted?
I did not.
Okay.
No.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Well, yeah.
Okay. All right. So you get to what's your reception at Fort Bragg like?
Well, you know, and this is typically, you'll see this in every movie that has this, you know, as soon as you get there, they're yelling at you, get off the bus. And I will say that, you know, this harkens back to the book Born on the 4th of July. I wrestled in high school. I was very aware of the physical aspects of what to expect and all this kind of stuff. And some people can't deal with that. I was fine with pushing myself to the limits. I know I can only do so much, but I will get to that point where I can't go any further. But I'd see guys break down, cry, and everything else.
Okay, that's the physical side of things, but there's also the mental or the psychological side of the training.
Well, my wrestling coach was pretty hard.
Okay.
I hate to say it, but I saw a lot of humor in it. It kind of cracked me up. You know, maybe call me Gomer Pyle, who never really understood the abuse he was getting, but I just never had an issue.
As long as you didn't smile at the wrong time in front of the sergeant.
You have to keep it in check.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically you had an approach that worked fairly well for you to get through basic training.
Yeah, except for the fact that I like to do things on my own and be self-sufficient, and I got called into my drill sergeant's office because I was not using the buddy system. You want to rely on other people to assist you, and he says, you've got to do that, you know. He said, you know, you help each other with your backpack and stuff like this to put them on. I go, I'm able to do that by myself. He was not going to let me go until he won that argument. I go, okay, I'll try to do the buddy system.
And did you have any success at that?
Not until I got into Vietnam, and specifically when I got to firebase Ripcord, I realized, okay, this is the real stuff. You are dependent on other people.
Okay. Well, you got through basic.
I did.
All right. And then where did you go after basic?
I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama, bused down there, and advanced individual training, they call AIT.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where I did that.
And what kind of training did you get there?
Well, at that point, it was basically infantry training, but when we got there, they called out a list of names and had you move over to this group here. And it's like, okay. So there's a group of us, maybe 30, 40 people, soldiers, and they said, okay, you gentlemen are going to be 11 Charlies, your mortar men now. Mm-hmm. And this is where my being naive comes in and says, wow, what is a mortar? What I found out later, and you know, I'm not bragging or anything, they went through the records of all of us who were being shipped down there to Fort McClellan, and found the people with the highest capabilities of learning, IQ, mathematics, whatever, and realized that these guys would be more adept at being mortarmen because they can understand the intricacies of it. Because errors like that, if you don't operate a weapon right, it's going to hurt other people, it's going to hurt yourself. So that's how that came about.
Yeah. And that's how they did a lot of things. If they need somebody, they go through the list and say, okay, you want them. Okay, so there you are. So what did your training actually consist of then at Fort McClellan?
Well, I mean, we took the basic infantry training, but we also spent a lot of time with the weapons, and it culminated. We worked with dummy rounds and stuff like this and firing. We had classrooms to learn the intricacies of operating the various components of the weapon, the aiming sight. You have to calibrate it to specifics that are being sent to you by people doing the programming of determining the angle of a mortar weapon, left and right, how many charges you would put on a weapon. There's a maximum of 9 charges, which would catapult it the furthest distance. So you learn all of these intricacies. And then toward the end of the campaign, you actually do live firing.
Okay. And do they teach you about making calculations for wind speed and direction and that sort of stuff? Or?
Well, I was not involved in that. my specific role was as a mortarman operating the weapon.
Okay.
Other guys were called FDC, fire direction control, and they took specific training in that. And then we would work together once, certainly in Vietnam. Then they would have their own little bunker. They would do all the plotting and everything. They'd call it down to us.
Right.
We'd calibrate it on the weapon and fire.
So they're basically giving you the settings for the weapon itself, but they've made the calculations to determine the settings.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And I don't know, did you decide that you were better off with mortars or would rather have been in the infantry, or did you just not even think about it?
I didn't think about it too much, really. I thought it was an honor that they would put me in that group. There are pros and cons, and most of your line company, your foot soldiers, would agree that we had it cushier, and for the most part, we did. I won't deny that. Not that we didn't go out into the jungle on occasion, and we had one particular operation that they plopped us in a jungle for a 3-day mission that lasted 7 days. The problem was that as a mortarman, you're stationary. You don't roam around and set up a different NDP at night, night defense perimeter. You are in a single spot. Everybody knows where you're firing from. So that is truly scary because it makes it easier for you to be overrun. So, but anyway, that being said, when Firebase Ripcord came about, yes, we're up on a hilltop and we're the target. So we got pummeled up there.
Yeah.
At the same time, the line companies are getting pummeled out in the jungle. So.
But they at least get to change position once in a while, and
Yeah.
the enemy doesn't always know where they are. Okay. All right. So, how long does AIT last?
I went down in July. I can't remember the specific date, and then I graduated from that in September. So it was roughly about 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah, 8 weeks was pretty much standard at that point. Sometimes a little longer, depending on circumstances.
Right, and then I got a 1-month leave before leaving for Vietnam, and I got to Vietnam October 29th.
Okay, so you went back to DC for the leave?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did people start looking at you funny because you had short hair, or did you not really notice?
That's something I don't recall, but knowing me, I probably would have been cloistered and just, staying within my own little neighborhood with friends. So I didn't really subject myself to that or have any repercussions from other people.
Okay. All right. And how did you feel about the prospect of going to Vietnam at that point?
Well, I wasn't overjoyed, but again, when I volunteered for the draft, I knew that was pretty much going to be the end result. What was interesting, and I don't know how true it is, when I was at Fort McClellan doing my AIT, a gentleman pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I've seen the orders that came in. You're going to be assigned to Fort Carson, Colorado." Oh, really? Okay. Then a couple of weeks later, I got the orders, and it was for Vietnam. What happened, and this is just what I'm guessing, during that window between Fort Carson and Vietnam, Richard Nixon announced a pullout from Vietnam. He was going to start withdrawing. But it seems that in the process of announcing withdrawing, they were changing orders and sent more people over. It's just that sleight of hand type of operation.
Yeah. All right. Now, how do they get you to Vietnam?
Hey, all expenses paid. My family drove me to Dulles Airport outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia, and I caught the flight, flew to San Francisco, and spent a day there before then flying on to Hawaii, and then Hawaii, Guam, Wake Island, and then to Vietnam.
Okay, so you had a plane that needed to refuel a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
And departing Hawaii, as the plane took off and circled around, it flew over the Punch Bowl, which is a cemetery for World War II soldiers who died. And it's like, that's really not what I want to see right now. It really struck home that this is the end result of what can happen in war. So yeah, it makes you think very deeply.
Yeah. Were you on a military aircraft or a chartered civilian?
Charter.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what's your first impression of Vietnam?
Hot and humid. I can't recall the smell of it, but when they opened the door, the heat, it was just overwhelming.
And what do you do when you get off the plane?
You do whatever you're told. They grouped us together and they transported us. We then had in-country training for the better part of a week, and they would put us on guard duty at night within the city of Benoit. I mean, it was a very safe area, but still we were scared to death. It's like, we're out here in a bunker, who knows what's going to happen. So.
And did they try to teach you anything about survival in Vietnam or the do's and don'ts?
We went through the basics once again. Teaching us what to do if you set off a flare, whether it's a trip flare, whether it's an overhead flare. How do you react? If it's an overhead flare, they don't really know who you are. You freeze. If it's a trip flare, you tell them the way you're positioned, so you run like heck. So things like that.
Okay. All right. And at this point, you don't have a particular assignment yet?
No, I do not.
Okay. And so how long does it take before you get one?
At the end of that better part of a week training, again, like the military, they start calling names and get you lined up, and said that, all right, Mr. Shuttleworth, you're going to be in the 101st Airborne Division. And again, my being naive, and just every phase of my career was naive, and I learn as I go. And I'm like, excuse me, I think that means I should know how to jump out of a plane. I've never had parachute training. No, just get over here. I did not know that 101st Airborne was air mobile, meaning you would get transported by helicopter.
Right. Okay. How did they get you up to the 101st?
In a C-130, because I came into Benoit, which is in the southern part of the country.
Yeah.
I was assigned to the 101st at Camp Evans, which is way up on the northern end. So it was a pretty long flight, and just basically, I can't tell you exact miles, maybe 30 miles south of the DMZ.
Yeah. Okay. So you're up there now, and once you get up to Camp Evans, now what happens?
When we got off the plane, there was a vehicle, a deuce and a half. We all climbed aboard. They transported us to our new company area. They got us set up, and they had what they call hooches, the barracks, screen-sided metal roof. We'd stay there and went through a little orientation, and then ultimately it was broken down where we'd be assigned to a specific mortar section. There were a total of 3 mortar sections, each with 3 squads and a fire direction control.
Okay. And how many tubes total in the platoon?
Each section had 3 mortar weapons,
Okay.
So that's a total of 9.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, was the mortar platoon out in the field at that point, or were they on the base?
Somewhere in the field. Now, bear in mind that I got there at the end of October, so it was really early November before I got assigned to Camp Evans.
Okay. Yeah.
In the north, the northern part of Vietnam, that is when monsoon season hits. It's just a reverse in the southern part of the country. So because of monsoon season, your mortar sections were staying closer to home. I was assigned to a group within the perimeter of Camp Evans. There were a series of sectors surrounding the entire base, and the base was a pretty good sized base with an airfield in the middle and everything. I was assigned to this section called Orange Sector, and I joined the group there, and then we would fire rounds at night, H&Is, they call it, harassment and interdiction, just pinpointing locations outside the perimeter so that if the enemy was trying to come in, it would, in theory, keep them at bay.
Mm-hmm. All right. Did you ever fire elimination rounds at night? Or?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And would that be when there was some concern that there might be somebody sneaking up on you, or do you not know why? The military mindset, you generally don't know the whys of anything. You just do what you're told. But, sometimes it would be to fire them just for the sake of firing them, just to keep anybody at bay. Very rarely did we have any sighted movement that we were trying to keep an eye on. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how long was it before you actually start going out into the field?
I got teased a lot because unlike some of the people who came into the country with me, I stayed at Orange Sector with my group until February. Okay. So my first several months were very cushy.
Okay. So what was daily life on Camp Evans like?
It was pretty laid back. You go through the training and there's a structure and all these demands on you. At Camp Evans, it was pretty laid back, and with me being assigned to Orange Sector, oftentimes I would be called to perform bunker guard duty at night if I wasn't actively working a weapon, which meant that you would go to the outer perimeter just inside the barbed wire fence. There were a series of bunkers. You'd be assigned to one, and you'd be there with two other gentlemen. So you'd do shifts, a 1 hour shift, and then you'd wake up the next guy, and you'd sleep for 2 hours, and they'll rotate through the night. So I did that a lot, and but it was pretty laid back, and oftentimes during the day we could catch a ride back to the center of Camp Evans and go to the PX and stuff like that. So it was a very peaceful introduction to things, and of course, all good things come to an end.
Okay, all right. Were you? What? There are stereotypes about rear areas in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And one of them has to do with drug use. I mean, were you observing any of that where you were?
No, not at that time. I do know that Orange Sector, which consisted of a large bivouac tent for our mortar section, and then there was a smaller tent that the sergeants and officers would stay at. But behind us was scrub brush, and it seemed to be interspersed with a lot of marijuana plants back there. And I was not what they called a head.
Yeah.
That was not my thing, and I didn't pay attention. But I never even noticed people smoking, but they were harvesting leaves, so obviously they did. Yeah. But the drug element was not something that I related to at that time.
Okay. So really, in your sector, there was pretty much just the mortar unit? You
Yes.
didn't have other people there with you?
No. During the daytime, there were no guards on duty at the perimeter. We did have a very tall tower, and someone would be up there with binoculars. So if something odd were to happen, which it never seemed to, then they would call in other troops to come in.
All right. So you weren't really in a busy part of the base either?
No.
Okay. So the other sort of stereotype has to do with racial tensions. I think maybe with a small group like yours.
We got along pretty well. I mean, there were tensions, but the group I was with was cool. Black, white, Hispanic, it didn't matter. When we heard of stuff going down, it's like, we got to get out of here. So collectively, we just avoided that.
Right. Okay. So you get a kind of gradual introduction to Vietnam in a way.
I did.
So now February, what happens?
In February, and this was still at the tail end of monsoon season, I was assigned to my first firebase. Firebase Jack was the name of it. It was just a couple miles outside of Camp Evans. Camp Evans was on a plateau, and then it dipped down into a valley and then rose up into the mountains. We were right on the edge of the plateau looking over the valley, and I was there for about 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty laid back too. You don't get harassed when you're out in the fire bases. It's not like your hair is too long, you need a haircut and all this kind of stuff. You're required to shave and stuff, but they weren't just pounding you every day about dirty boots and stuff like that. And bear in mind that with the monsoon season, it's just one giant mud puddle, so you're constantly wet and filthy anyway.
Right. Now, when you were on Evans and then when you're out at Jack, are you taking any incoming fire of any kind?
When I was at Evans, we would hear an occasional, very rare, an occasional incoming rocket or mortar.
Mm-hmm.
Orange sector was right at the edge of the perimeter, just between the orange sector and the main part of camp was this huge excavated area that was called the ASP, the ammo supply point, where they stored all the ammo.
Yeah.
So that was a target, and it's like, the enemy, if they know where it is, that's a good place to try to throw rockets, because, if it were to happen, they hit the right spot, it could blow up a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But it never did.
Yeah. And where you were, there weren't really good targets.
No.
Okay. And then what about on Jack? Did you get any harassment there?
During the 3 weeks I was there, no,
Okay.
we did not.
All right. And then, do you leave there then in March? Or?
What happened was that we were given an assignment, and I was talking to a gentleman last night for clarification. Our entire section was helicoptered out into the triple canopy up in the mountains. There's a group within Echo Company, and Echo Company is broken down into reconnaissance,
Mm-hmm.
the LZ cutters, the landing zone cutters with chainsaws who would clear out a clearing in the jungle,
Mm-hmm.
and mortars,
Right.
and that was the way it was broken down. The LZ cutters had repelled into the jungle. They had used their chainsaws and what's called Bangalore torpedoes to blow out a clearing. So it's all this red clay soil that's just turned upside down and a lot of debris on the outer part of it. They dropped us in there by helicopter. It was supposed to be a 3-day mission. And that 3-day mission, with our 3 days of food and water, extended out to a 7-day operation. And it was really very bad. We had heat strokes and everything, and we couldn't get to water. We did have the reconnaissance group come up part of the time we were there to help us with our defensive perimeter. But as I said earlier, you're a sitting target out in the jungle, and everybody knows where the firing's coming from. So it was a pretty dicey situation. We got through it. We were harmed more by our own side for not resupplying us, and it wasn't until we had casualties from the lack of nourishment and heat and everything else that they finally evacuated some of the soldiers, and then they resupplied us. But then no sooner did they resupply us than they pulled the whole group back. So.
Okay. Did you have any of the line companies working in the area around you? Or?
Yeah, and I got clarification on that last night. My understanding had been, and these are rumors that circulate, so you never really know officially what's going on. My understanding was that the line companies working around us were looking for an enemy field hospital that had been reported. And I talked to a gentleman last night who was in our FDC group, John Hedrick.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted clarification because I've never been clear on the particulars, and I'm still trying to piece it together of why this operation took place. Timeline, it comes right before what they consider the timeline of the Operation Texas Star and Ripcord. I mean, it's like a week prior to that, and I didn't know if it was connected or not. Well, John told me last night that in essence, I think the lieutenant colonel was on leave. Someone else has stepped up to run the operation, and this is kind of a microcosm of what happened on Ripcord. They put our mortar group in a center of this because they knew that they were, according to John, there were like 4 regiments of NVA in the area. They wanted us to be the sacrificial lamb tied to the stake to draw the enemy so that then our military, our line companies could attack and kill the enemy. So yeah, we were bait. And, and I feel the same way about Ripcord itself. We were the sitting target and we got totally surrounded. And I do have that sense that we were the bait. And all to do with Ripcord, and we'll get to that obviously, but we were the target, and we were right at the edge of being overrun. We were totally surrounded, and they evacuated us and then bombed the heck out of it. So yeah, we were the bait to draw the enemy, and then once the enemy was there, boom, bring in the B-52s and just bomb the heck out of them.
All right, so now you're kind of getting introduced a little bit more to what the war was like. Now, did you take mortar fire or things like that while you were in that position?
No, I did not take, not direct mortar fire. No, it wasn't until I got on Firebase Ripcord that we started really taking incoming.
All right, so on some level, the bait thing didn't necessarily work that well.
Right,
Yeah,
that's true.
Okay, all right, so now we're getting in March. And then in the middle of March, there's the first attempt to set up a base on Ripcord, which aborts. And then there's the second one on April 1st, and that aborts. So in that period, kind of mid-March into early April, before the base is successfully established, what are you doing?
Now, I will say this operation in the landing zone in the jungle, that was from February 23rd to March 1st.
Right.
So that was that time frame. On March 16th, we were back in Orange Sector. We were told to gear up, come back to the company area, that we were going to go out on a mission. In other words, we were going to go to Fireplace Ripcord. So we were prepared. We were ready to go to the landing pad and wait for the helicopters to take us out. And then the whole thing got aborted. And it's like, forget it, just go back to Orange Sector. So it wasn't for a couple more weeks that we actually physically went out there.
Okay. Now, did you go out there when B Company tried to set up on April 1st?
No, we didn't go out at that time.
Okay.
I didn't get there until April 11th.
Okay. So that's right after C Company goes up and actually successfully starts to set up the base.
Correct.
Okay. So when you get out to Ripcord, what are you doing at first?
Well, what happened was, and again, not really knowing officially what's going on, the rumor we heard was that, okay, you mortar guys, we're going to dump you on a hill. You've got line companies working around you, but you're going to be the first one on the hilltop. And I was like, oh, good, because we had heard the stories about what was going on the hilltop. So yeah, we were jittery, but we all, each squad got in a Huey helicopter. We flew out there collectively. On the way out, I could see smoke on top of the hill. I could see activity, which fortunately was our side. And there was actually a bulldozer out there by the time we landed that was leveling the various areas to create the 155 area, and then they leveled the 105 area. They graded the area for the main helicopter pad. So all that was in production by the time we got there. So at that point, and I have no idea who made the decision, but we were told where to start setting up our mortar weapons. And as it turned out, the main helicopter pad was up on the highest level. The Tactical Operations Center was right there, and then just above them was the artillery battery. We were told to dig in just below the helicopter pad. So we are lining the lower edge of the helicopter pad, mortar weapon 1, 2, and 3, and then another bunker would be set up for the FDC. But, and this was always the case, when you go somewhere, step one, above and beyond anything else, is set up your weapons. It is key that you have your defensive weapons set up. Everything else is just, secondary.
Okay. Did you dig pits for the mortars, or did
Yes.
someone? Okay.
Yeah.
And did you do that yourself, or did the
Yeah.
engineers? Okay.
No. We dug in, and again, it was on a slope, so we had to dig down and out to level that. And then the dirt that we used, we would fill up empty ammo boxes, we'd fill up sandbags, line the perimeter, and then the last thing we would do would be to actually construct the bunker. And all that was done by us. So it was a laborious job. It also happened to take place as the rains were coming in. It was still at the tail end of that. So the whole area was a giant mud puddle. And at that point, you could not even fill up a sandbag because the soil was so wet and mushy. It would just ooze right through the webbing on the sandbag.
Okay. So where you were setting up, you pretty much had dirt to dig rather than rock?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's parts of that hill that were pretty rocky.
There were boulders everywhere, but also it was a hillside that was mostly composed of just dirt.
Okay. All right. So at this point, were you using the weapons much, or were you mostly just digging?
We were using the weapons because there were line companies around us, but mostly it was H&I because we knew that the enemy was out there somewhere. And again, who determines this, I don't know, but it was plotted as to the most logical avenues for attacking us. So these things were pre-plotted, and the FDC group would give us coordinates, and we would just constantly pound those areas just to keep the enemy at bay.
All right. And then how long did you stay up on Ripcord continuously after you got there?
I literally was assigned to a squad the day before the 11th. So on April 10th, I was assigned to a new squad for me that just so happened to be the squad that was going out to Ripcord.
So initially it was just one squad going out?
Well, not one section.
One section, right?
Well, actually, two sections. There was our section that was lining the helicopter pad.
Yeah.
There was another section that was digging in down below us on the hill, and then they had 3 weapons down there.
Okay. And was there a point when all 3 of the sections were there? Or?
Only at the very tail end of the battle at Ripcord. A 3rd section was brought out, and they literally never set up their weapons. There was just too much going on. It was too dangerous. There were too many explosions. So they sat in the bunkers with the other mortarmen until we evacuated.
All right. And then did you ever take your weapon out into the field during that Ripcord period?
No, I was on the base, well, certainly during the battle. I was shuffled in and out, back and forth, between April and the middle of June.
Yeah.
And
so shuttling back and forth between where?
basically between Firebase Ripcord and Camp Evans.
Okay.
Like I said, I was assigned to this new section the day prior to going out to Ripcord the first time. We pulled back a week later. We went back to Camp Evans. At that point, they decided to restructure all the sections and move people around, because you have, particularly Vietnam, you're not a collective group that's together the whole time. Pieces are changing constantly. People come into Vietnam individually at a certain time and date and leave at a certain time and date. So you have good friends that after 3 months they're gone, or they're there 6 months after you leave. So you had constant departures, which will leave gaps in the structure of the sections. So then they would plug in, well, this guy was a really good gunner, this guy's good ammo bearer, this guy does this. So they would move the pieces around to make sure that you had a good squad where all the people could work together. So after a week on Ripcord with my new group, I went back to the rear, and then he turned around and assigned me to another group that was going back out to Ripcord. And I said, oh, well, you know, I'm back. So then I was there for a couple weeks again before going back to Orange Sector. And I bounced back and forth. We came back for the entire month of March. We rotated out, or excuse me, May, I'm sorry. We rotated out of Ripcord, went back to the rear. We had to go through training, not just with mortar weapons, but zeroing weapons and all this kind of stuff. And when we came back, another section would go out and take our place. So I didn't come back out full time until the middle of June. And then I was there for the duration of the battle until July 23rd.
Okay. So in May and June, before the bombardment becomes steady in July, so what was daily life like on the base?
For the most part, peaceful. When I first got after my first week, was my first experience with true incoming rounds. And I was up on the landing pad, the helicopter pad, and I'm hearing explosions, and I'm seeing the clouds of dirt getting closer and closer and closer. The enemy is walking rounds across the top of the firebase. So, you know, I took shelter. And it's silly, but once it died down, one of our sergeants was walking around taking everybody's name. It's like, you just earned a combat infantryman's badge because you've been under fire. And I'm like, seriously? We're concerned about that right now? But that's how it came about, and really that was my first experience of being in close proximity to the enemy actually firing something at me.
Okay. And what sort of physical accommodations did you have there? Where did you sleep?
We dug our own bunkers, and it very primitive, dirt floor. The walls were invariably made of dirt-filled ammo boxes to create your walls. The roof was either structured from logs that had been dragged up from the base of Ripcord, or what they called PSP. It's perforated steel plating. It's basically a metal designed to interlock. It's corrugated to give it strength. They generally use these on airstrips to give a hard landing for planes so it doesn't sink down in dirt, but they work very well. 10 feet long. We could straddle those across the roof and then put sandbags on top of it, so it gave us pretty good shelter. But yeah, I mean, it was damp, it was muddy, but it was protective, so home sweet home.
All right. And what do you do for food?
Sea rations. Sea rations certainly exclusively for a good period of time. Then they built, the bulldozer trenched out a clearing. They brought in essence, like a prefab wooden structure that became the mess hall. And they would serve lunch. I'm thinking it was just one time a day, I can't recall, but they would have hot meals, at least until a rocket went down through the opening and blew the place up. But we relied on sea rations quite a bit. And I don't know any better. I never had an issue with sea rations. It was food. You know, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat it. I don't gripe. So.
All right. Okay. And then you start. Now you're paying much attention to what's going around in the field around you, or do you just follow your orders?
No, the only thing we knew about what was going on in the field was when we'd have firing operations, and you realize, okay, somebody's in trouble, and you know, they were our main concern. If somebody needed our help, then by golly, we were going to get out there and do what we could to support them.
Okay. Then you get to July 1st.
Yes.
Now, are there other incidents, things that happened before July 1st that you wanted to get into the story here?
Not so much. It was strangely enough, and people have horrible recollections of Firebase Ripcord, but there were incredible times of just peace and tranquility. It was beautiful up there. You're on a high elevation overlooking the surrounding mountains, and you become attuned to nature. Except for fire missions, I mean, you go to bed when it gets dark, you wake up when it gets light, you're in the rhythm of things, and you see the cloud cover in the morning when the sun would come up. It was like a sea of clouds below where you were. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful.
Okay. One thing I do want to bring in here. There were at times South Vietnamese artillery batteries on the base. What did you observe with them?
The South Vietnamese, the Arbans, they were brought in, they operated, there were 2 levels of artillery. At that time, it was the 155 artillery is up on a higher plateau. The Arbans came in 105 artillery on the lower platform, and they were brought in by Chinook helicopter, and I believe it was like a single helicopter, but I mean, there were like 100 people pouring out of that with all of their equipment, their cages with chickens. I was waiting to see pigs and whatnot, but I mean, they brought their home with them, and they set up. And in addition to the soldiers, they also had groups of, from my understanding, they were like AWOLs and the malcontents who were brought out there as the labor to do some of the work to get them set up. And they weren't part of the artillery group. And it's like, you're on your own, you sleep wherever you can find a place. And they just kind of scattered out all over the hill.
All right. And did you have much contact with them?
No, I did not, although one of these so-called AWOLs, he befriended our group, and it's like, call it ghosting. He was disappearing from what he was supposed to be doing. He'd come over and hang around with us, and it was funny because he had this really slim mustache that probably was about 15 or 20 hairs that he called mustache, and he would point to his mustache and ask me, "Number one, huh? Number one?" Number one meaning good mustache, huh? And I go, "Nah, number 10, number 10." And he's like, it hurt his feeling. Number 10 was, rock bottom. So he comes back later that day, he's clean shaven. "Number one?" "Yeah, dude, number one, looking good." But other than that, we had really no interaction whatsoever with the Arbin.
Okay. And then at what point did they go away?
I don't recall dates on that, but because, like I said, I was in and out, but ultimately they were replaced by the U.S. artillery group, and they put in 155 artillery weapons down on that lower pad at that, or that lower battery at that time. They switched it out. Okay.
So we had, in the end, we had a 105 and a 155 battery there.
Yeah.
They were American, essentially.
Yeah, correct.
And not Vietnamese.
That's
okay.
Correct.
So now we get to July 1st.
Yes.
And what starts to happen on July 1st?
Well, and again, information trickles downhill very slowly, and it's strictly a need-to-know basis. It wasn't until the day before July 1st that we got word that we were going to be attacked the following day, July 1st. And it's like, ooh, so, we were prepared. We made sure that our mortar pit was stocked with a whole bunch of ammunition. And early in the morning of July 1st, the rounds started coming in. So, yeah, the attack and the assault began. Okay.
And what kind of rounds were you receiving?
High explosive. We were receiving gas rounds as well, and it was rocket, it was our mortars, it was small arms fire, so it was a compendium of all this stuff. And our positions, and I didn't say this earlier, but when I initially went to Ripcord, I was up on the higher mortar section. But when I went back out for further work out there, they had moved us into the section down below.
Okay.
So we were on a heavily sloped hillside. We reinforced our bunker with a lot of sandbags on the side that was facing outward because that was more susceptible to direct rocket attack.
Okay. And were you taking any direct fire on your side of the hill? Were there heavy machine guns or recoilless rifles or things like that shooting at you?
Not so much because we were so far on the outer edge that most of the incoming was focused higher up where the larger group of positions were located.
So the artillery and helipads
Yeah.
and that kind of thing.
I mean, we did have one experience where they dropped about 10 rounds right on top of us, and I was fortunate enough to dive down into a foxhole and avoid getting wounded. My rifle took a nice hole in the stock. I got covered in dirt, but that's at that point that was as close as I had come to actually being killed.
Okay. Now, mortar pits have to be open.
Correct.
So, in principle, enemy mortar fire, in particular, plunging fire, could come down.
That is correct.
Did you think they ever targeted you?
I think in this one instance that I just described, they did. It was a huge concern. We had, like I had described, our bunker was on the side of a hill, and then just beyond that was our leveled area with the mortar weapon set up. And when we were getting rounds close to us, we would get inside the bunker, and we had, it's almost like, what do they call it, a Dutch door, a little wooden door. It was a double door, higher and lower hinge sections. And we would take turns looking out between the crack in the door to make sure that our hadn't caught on fire from explosions. And in one instance, we did take a close round that the concussion blew the door inward and broke my nose. I was seeing stars. But for the most part, the random rounds scattered everywhere. But fortunately, we had some guys who were lightly wounded, but nothing in our section that was totally damaging anyone's health. We did lose a couple guys in the other group who ended up in the hospital in Japan.
All right. And did you ever do basically counter battery fire? Did you try to mortar the enemy's mortar positions?
Constantly, yeah. And there was a funny incident that we were firing rounds, and as we were firing, rounds were hitting our perimeter. And one of the officers, I don't know who it was, but he said, "You guys are dropping them pretty close, aren't you?" I go, "Those aren't ours. Ours are going way out there." And I went to turn and tell him something. He was gone. So yeah, it was this constant give and take. We're lobbing them out there, they're lobbing them in, and you put yourself in harm's way to be out there firing weapons when there's incoming. But sometimes you have to do that because our line company's dependent on us.
Of course, on July 1st, there was a line company, Charlie Company, that was up on Hill 902.
Yes.
And they were observing and trying to shoot at one of the mortar positions.
Yep.
And they stayed overnight, a second night, on the night of July 1st to July 2nd. And at that point, they got hit. Now, what do you remember about that night?
We spent long hours firing mortars, as we did in several instances, and I'm sure we'll be talking about our Hill 805, which was something that 805 is one that hurts. But yeah, we would go ahead and we firing long hours and expending a lot of rounds in support of these guys.
Now, when you're doing this and doing it at night, are you firing mostly illumination, or were you also firing explosives?
Both. Both, yeah. We had 4 types of rounds. You had illumination, you had high explosive, you had tear gas rounds, and you had white phosphorus rounds. And but the bread and butter was basically the high explosives, and of course the illumination rounds to help the guys out there.
Right. Okay. And I guess where you are, you don't really know what's happening out there.
No.
Now, from your side, could you see Hill 902 from where you were, or were you facing a different direction?
No, we were facing from the southwest corner. We were looking out towards the South China Sea.
Okay.
Camp Evans was off in a distance, but there was a mountain that literally was in line with it, so you couldn't see Camp Evans.
Right.
We just knew it was beyond that hill.
But you could see 805?
Yeah, it was right below us, right in
Okay.
front of us. So
Just
yeah,
part of, yeah. Okay. So the 902 fight happened initially, and then from then on, so through the rest of July until the base is evacuated, then you're coming under regular fire?
daily. And the thing about the fire, the mortar and rocket firing that was coming in at us, for the most part, it was happening during the daytime, because the flashes from their weapons would have revealed their position at night. So the nights were relatively calm. We would use the nighttime to open up new pallets of ammunition and restock our mortar pits. So there were long hours of work day and night, and we did not get much sleep during the time. You just catch a few winks when you could.
Okay. Now, were there, I guess, and then, I guess before the extended fight on Hill 805,
Yeah.
are there other particular incidents or things that you remember that you want to put in the story?
Good point. July 5th, we're on the hillside on the southwest corner. Above us, where it leveled off, there was something that everybody has come to know as a feature on the hilltop called impact rock. A very, very huge boulder that was scarred on the face of it from a bomb, who knows when. But impact rock was up there. Just on our side of impact rock, there was a quad 50 machine gun set up. To the left of impact rock, facing towards the artillery, a big trench had been excavated, and that was a burn pit for trash. That's where all the excess ammo boxes and everything else would be thrown. And it was just constantly smoldering. Sometimes at night, if we had a few moments, we'd just go up there and just catch up with friends and talk and just watch the, it's caveman stuff, people want to huddle around a fire, and it was very peaceful, and it helps relieve stress. But on July 5th, a helicopter flew directly over the fire pit and blew ashes down the hill and caught one of our mortar pits, caught the ammunition on fire. And the charges on mortar rounds are tied to it by metal prongs on the outside edge by the tail fin. Once they ignite, they go up like that. What happened was things were starting to really catch fire, and one of the gentlemen in one of our squads, actually he was in fire direction control, he very bravely grabbed a shovel and ran down here and started digging and throwing dirt on the rounds, and knowing full well that they could explode at any time. As he did that, other soldiers came to assist him. People pitched in and started digging and throwing dirt on it. A fire extinguisher was grabbed and started putting out everything. Nothing blew, fortunately, and it could have been a real huge catastrophe, and it just left this whole side of that mortar pit just charred. I mean, just the mortar rounds come in a cardboard tube, and the cardboard tubes are about 2 feet long, and the cardboard tubes were permanently stacked in a covered area on the edge of the pit. And then new rounds are split into these tubes, so they're stacked up. Well, all the cardboard burnt, all the rounds are just in a heap at the base of that little storage area. I decided I decided this was a good time to take photographs. I have a good documentation, photographs of this as it's burning, and I had an officer tell me that I needed to get out of there. It was dangerous to be there, and I lied to him and told him that I was with the Stars and Stripes newspaper and I was there to document it. And he's grabbed me by the arm trying to tell me how best to get an angle and a view of it. So, and that's how it came about that I did get nice pictures of that particular incident. But yeah, it was a very, very scary incident. It could have been much, much worse.
All right. Now, the campaign continues. The companies are going out and sometimes running into the enemy. There was some bad stuff on Hill 1000 on July 7th and 8th. And so forth, but most of those actions were relatively brief.
Yes.
But then you get a little bit later in July, and now you get two companies, including one from 2nd 501st, operating on and around Hill 805.
Correct.
Okay, and that goes on for several days as the company from 2501 is trying to stay on the top of the hill, and the NVA are concentrating on them.
That is correct.
Okay, so what do you remember about that battle?
Too much. That was, and I'm going to cheat here and use my notes, but the dates, July 13th through the 16th, Hill 805 was under attack. And when they got up there, 805 was close enough to us. It was a lower elevation than where we were on Ripcord. So we're looking down at it. The top of 805, whether it was Agent Orange or just a lot of explosions, had cleared most of the top of the hill. And like Ripcord, there were large boulders scattered around on top of that. But it was close enough that we could see the U.S. soldiers moving around on top of there, trying to establish foxholes and whatnot. So that on the 13th we could see that. And then the night of the 13th, the firefight started, and it was the eeriest feeling because we're witness to it. It's like being in a theater and watching a show, and you're helpless. You can't do anything about it but observe it. Now, bearing in mind also that we were doing everything we possibly could in support of that. We were firing illumination rounds, we were firing high explosives, everything we could to assist them, and we spent long hours doing that. But at the same time, we're watching what's going on. The interesting thing about the U.S. armament and the armament that the NVA was using, U.S. soldiers had red tracer rounds on their bullets. The South Vietnamese or NVA had green tracer rounds. So as we're up there on the hilltop, you're seeing red rounds going this way, you're seeing green rounds going this way, you're seeing explosions from satchel charges and grenades, and it was devastating that you're watching this and knowing people are dying. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, you know, we're pumping in rounds, but you're an observer. And the strange thing also was that because of the distance, even though it was close enough to see, noise carries at a certain speed. So we see the flash of an explosion, and then it's 1001, 1002, boom. So everything was on a delay, and it's like sometimes you get a TV broadcast and the mouth's not in sync with the action. So we were witness to that, and July 13th, 14th, 15th, going to the 16th, this was happening night after night. And we're firing as many rounds as we can. We're trying to resupply as we can. And we were pumping out ammo just in huge volumes. I have been told that, all told on Ripcord, we went through 60,000 mortar rounds, 30,000 of which alone happened in the month of July in the 23 days. ammo was so scarce that, again, this is what I'm told, you know, somebody else could say, well, that's not really true. But what I was told was that the entire country of Vietnam, all the mortar rounds in the country were being exclusively routed to us on Firebase Ripcord because it was so crucial that we were the battle that was going on in the entire country.
Okay.
So we were doing this during our firing missions to help assist on 805. They also brought in helicopters, Cobras, and helicopters dropping flares and everything. So when they would come in, then we would have to back off on our firing
Right.
because we didn't want to hit our own aircraft. So it was this constant give and take that went on for hours and hours at a time.
Did you see sending in jets or the gunships with the planes with the miniguns or things like that?
Yeah. It's an interesting watching the Cobras, and when I was there, end of '69 going into 1970, it was one of the earlier prototypes of the Cobra. They had, it was more of a round body. They ultimately switched to a Cobra that was more angular. But seeing these Cobras diving on a target, and I don't know if it was an optical illusion or not, but as they would dive and rockets would shoot out, it was almost like the backblast would just stop the helicopter in midair for a second. And it's like, but yeah, just, I'm not, and I honestly admit this, I'm not a huge fan of 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
Fireworks to this day just trigger things.
Yeah.
And I'm not alone in that.
No,
I'm sure
you're not.
that's I'm sure that's very common. I can go to fireworks if I know, okay, these are just little pretendency things. You know, I know what's going to happen. I'm cool with it. But explosions out of the blue are not a joy to me. But to see the chaos and everything swirling around during these operations in Vietnam, it was a three-ring circus. And during the daytime, we'd have jets flying overhead, dropping bombs on various targets, helicopters everywhere, constantly. So yeah, it was controlled chaos, I guess is a good description of it.
All right. And then not very long after that, a Chinook helicopter crashes onto the base.
Yeah,
And
it sure did. And it's well documented what happened. It was dropping a sling of ammunition and got shot down, and I think one of the crew members got pinned in underneath the helicopter and died.
Yeah.
And it ignited. Apparently, there was a fueling point up there.
well, it landed right on top of the ammo bunkers.
It was on top of the ammo bunker, and also I think there was fuel nearby that then caught fire as well.
Mm-hmm.
I have a photograph that I took of the hillside with the smoke billowing out. It just hundreds of feet up in the air, this big dark billowing cloud came pouring out. But it ignited everything on top of the hill. And later photographs, I went on R&R after Ripcord, just like, I think it's a good time to get out of this country. I happened to be on the airplane with a gentleman who took the famous photograph of the 105 battery itself on the top of the hill after this catastrophe. And it was just charred remains and artillery weapons at odd angles. But what happened was that, yes, it caught the ammo on fire. You had every type of artillery ammo blowing up, whether it was CS, tear gas, high explosive, white phosphorus. There's ammunition called flechette rounds. They're basically, I think, like a 1 3/4 inch darts, thousands of them in artillery round, and they caught on fire. The flechettes are flying through the air, tumble, and then come straight down, and there's a cushion. These flechette rounds are landing everywhere. What happened was that during this time, and this is hard for me, but my squad leader got a phone call, a field phone. We were directly wired landline from our mortar bunker to FDC. So there was direct communication. The phone rang, and he was told that he needed to send a volunteer up to the top of the hill to put out fires. And before he even conveyed to us what that message was, the look of horror on his face was just really disturbing. As he was explaining to us, and I could see the other guys freaking out, because there is no way you're going to go up there and do that. And it really hurt me to see my sergeant in position and the other guys in fear of it. So I volunteered. Excuse me.
That's okay.
But you know, I talked about the buddy system. That's a buddy system. I did something for them to help them out. So I volunteered. And I grabbed a entrenching tool, a collapsible shovel. I had on my flak vest, I had on my helmet. I'm trying to get up to the top of the hill, and explosions are everywhere. Not just from what's happening on top of the hill, but also the enemy dropping mortar rounds. And bear in mind that I'm all the way down on this end of the fire base. The actual fire was way up on top, so I had to get from point A to point B, zigzagging around trying to get cover. And just as I'm crossing the 155 battery, the lower battery, and then it rises up to the next level, someone shouting at me, and it was Lieutenant Colonel Lucas, and pretty much wanted to know what the hell I was doing up there. These orders had not come from him, apparently. He was incredulous when I explained to him that we were told to go up there and put out fires. And he looked at me like, "Are you friggin' crazy?" He said, "Get out of here, just go back." And you know, that is one order I would never argue with. Okay. So, because my mind was already racing, where am I going to take cover up there? How am I going to try to put out explosions without getting killed because it's flying everywhere? Can I hide behind a rock and just throw dirt over my head? All those things were running through my mind. And at the same time, as I'm going up there, I see other scattered soldiers trying to get up there as well, where they have been told, you've been volunteered. So at that point, yes, sir, I'm out of here. So I'm going back, and I've got to run through the artillery battery again. And all of a sudden, mortar rounds are landing everywhere, all around me. So I dove down this, basically a tunnel down to this buried shelter. And I go tumbling down there and knock over all these soldiers' food and coffee cups and everything. And it's like, hey, sorry, man. I go, no problem, we're cool. So I waited till it quieted down, and in the process of tumbling down there, the entrenching tool dug into my leg pretty deep and kind of tore it up a little bit. But I waited till things cleared up, and I raced back up. They wished me well, and got to the far end, and then ran and slid down to our bunker. And boy, did these guys look surprised when I got back. I think they thought they saw a ghost. So I was just totally drained. And once I regrouped a little bit, I stepped outside when things quieted down a little bit, and I took my photo of the firebase on fire. That's how I got that picture of it. So yeah, that was probably the worst of the worst for me.
All right. And then the bombardment continues then for the next
Yeah.
several days.
Yeah, and the 18th was really the beginning of the end, and they realized that we had lost almost all of our strength. The enemy was really coming in. They were pounding us furiously, and we were fighting back, but we no longer had the upper artillery, the 105s, and you know, I don't know what happened. I don't know what the orders were, but slowly, just prior to the 23rd, I guess it was the night of the 22nd, we were told we were evacuating the following morning.
Okay. Now there were still line companies down there, and
Yeah.
so Delta Company 1506 got into trouble down below you
Yeah.
on the 21st, and then on the 22nd, Alpha Company from your battalion got in trouble. And so were you still firing through the 22nd?
Yes.
Yeah.
We fired right up until moments before we evacuated. Well, twofold. We were supporting our own troops out there.
Yeah.
At the same time, we needed to expend our ammo so that it wasn't left behind, because we could not take it with us. So we literally fired all through the night of the 22nd. And the thing about a mortar weapon, as it would be with a machine gun or anything else, constant firing heats the barrel, and you can destroy a weapon quickly that way. So as we were firing, well, there were two things that happened. As we were firing, our base plate that was on the ground, that the tube is anchored into, was driving further and further into the dirt. I mean, it was sunken that far below, and we were afraid that it was throwing our measurements off for making adjustments for elevation, deflection, and whatnot. But the barrel was getting super hot, and we had one of our crew members, the assistant ammo bearer. His job was to gently put water on the barrel to try to keep it cool, and it worked. But that's something we did all through the night, was firing, and using up rounds. The word finally came that it was our turn to grab our gear and evacuate. And my job, I was the, we had a gunner, I was the assistant gunner. We had an ammo bearer and an assistant ammo bearer, and then we had a squad leader. So there were 5 of us in that particular squad. The gunner is responsible for the bipod that stabilizes the angle of the barrel. I was in charge of the barrel. The ammo bearer, he is in charge of the base plate. The squad leader, generally, he's in charge. There's a little case to put the ammo sight in. That was his responsibility. And then the assistant gunner, or the assistant ammo bearer, he gathers the aiming stakes that you had the sight on in order to get your deflection. So we gathered our equipment. Everybody had already run up the hill, except for the gunner and myself. We were trying to disassemble the bipod and the barrel. And there's a locking pin that locks the bipod to the barrel. You pull that out, and then the whole bipod, the collar on it, slides off the barrel. I would grab the barrel to stabilize that while he slid it off there, and not thinking, the heat from the barrel just singed into my arm and just burned into my flesh. And it's like, wow, this is not good. So I had this brainstorm that I think was really pretty good. Inside the bunker, I had an old pair of pants that had been discarded. And I grabbed those. I pulled one pants leg inside the other pants leg and formed a sleeve down over the barrel. And I was able to then put the barrel on my shoulder. The gunner and I then went up to Impact Rock, looking out across the 155 battery, and it's just explosion, 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 explosion. everything's blowing up between here and where we're going to evacuate on top of the hill. And we're hiding behind this rock, and we look at each other and in a sick way just started laughing, going, this is not good. And I told him, I'll go if you go. And at that point we just ran, and helmet bouncing on our head and backpack swaying back and forth. It's just trying to get there as quick as we could, but you're loaded down with, who knows how much weight of gear. So we finally got up to the top safely. Where the helicopter pad is up top, Tactical Operations Center is here, and as you've seen by photographs, there is a barrier of dirt-filled ammo boxes in front of TOC to cover the front door. We were able to get behind that barrier. Lieutenant Colonel Lucas was standing there with us. Helicopters are coming in, and as one helicopter comes in, he would get people to get on it, and there were soldiers, and I don't remember how or why at this time, but there were some South Vietnamese ARVNs there, and they were geared up, ready to get on a helicopter, but when the helicopter came in, they froze. And the helicopter is like, we can't stay here forever. So Lucas told the gunner and myself and one other gentleman to get on the plane, or on the helicopter, and we dove on there. It was only 3 of us who got on that particular helicopter, which is a shame because so many more soldiers could have gotten on there. But they took off, banked, and as they banked, you could see the NVA just right in the perimeter wire, and they were just swarming, and taking small arms fire at us. Our helicopter was hit, but fortunately,
okay. So you could physically see NVA right at the base of the hill.
Yeah.
Were they still under cover of some kind from where they were?
No, they were, for the most, they were, they hadn't gotten through the perimeter.
Yeah.
But there was a whole wave of them coming up the hill. So yeah, it was at that point.
Okay, but they hadn't gotten to the perimeter yet.
Right. Well, they were just right on the edge
Right
of it,
yeah.
on the outside edge of it.
Okay.
And the gentleman operating the machine gun on the helicopter, he was firing at them, and we were taking rounds. I was on the right side of the machine gun, and all the brass is ejecting all over me and peppering me with this hot brass, and nothing ever felt so good. I mean, I wasn't going to argue that because he was really protecting us and saving us, and then 15 minutes later, we're dropping down to Camp Evans, and it's like it's just the oddest transition to be in such an intense situation this minute, and being back in an area where people are milling around, not a clue what you just went through. Everything's normal, and but it's not normal. So, we collected our gear and walked back to our company area and regrouped.
All right. And then, did you learn more before you went on R&R about sort of what had happened, or?
No, okay. not a thing. I will say that shortly after we got back, our section was milling about, and the battalion chaplain came and told us that Lieutenant Colonel Lucas had been killed by, I guess it was a mortar round.
Yeah.
At the same time, we could hear the rumbling of B-52 bombs just peppering. The photos I've seen of firebase Ripcord after the fact, what was once a hill is now a depression. I mean, they just blew it off the face of the earth.
All right. Now, and you said then shortly after that you go on an R&R.
I put in for R&R.
Okay.
I wasn't able to get on R&R for a month, until a month later.
Right.
But we had lost so much strength in our groups that we were not a fully functioning unit at that time. So we were just doing kind of scrub work. They sent us, within 2 weeks, we were out at Firebase Catherine and Maureen, and they were starting to dismantle fire bases because it wouldn't be too long before monsoon came in. It was time to call it a year and wrap things up. So oddly, the day after we got back from Ripcord, they sent our section to what was referred to as Eagle Beach. It was like an in-country R&R area, and that was very peculiar. And guys were still emotionally scarred by the experience. And now, 24 hours later, you're sitting on a beach, looking at the serene landscape. The beach was on an island just off the coast of the mainland. I mean, you know, a couple hundred yards out, but it was secured. No worries in the world. And by the end of the day, the guys were getting pretty rowdy and slamming their 3.2% beer and feeling pretty good. You talk about drugs later or earlier. And, you know, this group's smoking marijuana over here. These guys are drinking booze here. The various groups were just letting loose and just trying to shake it off.
All right. So where do you go on the R&R?
I went to Sydney, Australia. I had not intended to go on R&R. My whole hope was to keep sending money home monthly because I wanted to buy a vehicle when I got home. And at that point, with what happened on Ripcord, it's like, I need to get out of here. I do not want to be here for any of the stuff anymore, and I have to. So I put in for R&R, and it was like the first week of September. I got the clearance to go ahead and go. And my 1 week R&R, I was able to stretch it out for 10 days. Not in Australia per se, but getting down to Da Nang to catch a plane out, and then coming back. And they tried to harass me when I got back. You took too long, and you know, hey, I couldn't catch a ride. You know, denied. Okay, you know, you can't. So it worked out nicely. R&R was really nice. I spent a lot of time by myself, just taking long walks and going to the movies. I saw Woodstock in the theater at that time. Also, crazy enough, I saw the movie MASH, which was, you know, why am I looking at a war movie after what I just experienced? But these are memories that stick with you, but that's what I did.
Sure. All right. And then how much time do you have left in Vietnam at that point?
Well, I came in October 29th, so I had time left. They sent us out to work on Firebase Rakkasan. And then the last operation I was in, this was in early October. It was called Firebase Helen, but basically it was Firebase Helen years and years prior. Basically, this bald knob up on top of this really pyramid-shaped hilltop. We prepped the area ourselves with our mortar weapon. We fired on the top of the hill to clear out anything or anybody who might have been up there. And then hopped on a helicopter and flew up there and set up our mortars there for a couple days to fire in support of various troops. And then after that, and that was only a couple day operation. After that, we were sent back to Orange Sector at Camp Evans. I was doing nightly guard duty. And then one night, it was about the 17th of October, my sergeant came out in a Jeep in the middle of the night to the perimeter and said, your orders came in, you're leaving to go home on the 18th. And I was like, well, that's cool. Can you get somebody to fill in for me right now so I can go back and pack? No, just do bunker guard tonight. We'll get you out in the morning. So I started the long process of slowly clearing out of the company area, going from Camp Evans down to Camera Bay and processing out there. And then I started a long flight home and flew into Seattle and then on to Chicago. And things were so hectic. I hadn't even told my parents I was coming home. I was basically going to just fly to the airport and catch a cab and go home, knock on the door. But when I got to Chicago, it was really late at night, so I called home and said, hey, I'll be in at such and such a time, and they met me at the airport.
All right. When you were leaving Cameron Bay on the plane, what was the atmosphere on the plane like?
As you'd expect, there was a cheer as soon as the plane took off, and then just quiet from that point. I spent a day at Cameron Bay by the runway, waiting for my name to be called, and it was all day long. They'd call, 200 people. Okay, this is your flight. Okay, call another. This is your flight. And this went on all day, and there was no flight. I had been up by processing and everything else. I had hardly gotten any sleep in 2 days, and it's like, I'm going to bed. There was an empty barracks. I went and slept, and when I came back, I said, "Excuse me, has my name been called?" And they said, "Yeah, you missed your flight." I said, "All right, just put me on the next one." So I finally got. At that point, I didn't care. I was in a safe place, and it's. Break the rules or whatever, but I got a good night's sleep, and I got on the plane, I got the heck out of there.
All right. So what do you do now when you get back home?
And this is something I pieced together over a long period of time. I tried to pretend like it never happened. I thought I could just pick up the pieces and everything would be good. And because I had more than 6 months left in the service, I was assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia. And they put me in a mechanized unit to play war games. And being kind of mouthy and stupid, my then Lieutenant Colonel at Fort Benning, he was saying something, and I said, it's kind of stupid. We're back in Vietnam, and now we're playing war games. We don't need training. He looked at me like, and he started asking me questions, and I said, well, I majored in art and community college before I came in. He said, can you do charts and stuff like that? Yeah. He made me his personal artist. I mean, talk about a cushy job that was not appreciated by other people. I had an office. I had a 9-to-5 job. I was helping him. He tried to put me in for an RCOM. It was a really cushy last 6 months in the service. It was funny because one night in the barracks that I was staying in, this gentleman was talking about how bad it had been on Ripcord. And I, excuse me, who were you with on Ripcord? And he looked at me like, oh. He said, no, man, I wasn't there. I was just making it. I was just trying to be cool. And he said, were you on Ripcord? I said, yeah. And the respect I got from people at that point was unbelievable, because soldiers at that time knew what had happened. The outside world didn't know. We haven't really talked about this, but as you well know, Ripcord happened at a time with the withdrawal from Vietnam. We were turning over the battle to the South Vietnamese, the ardent soldiers.
Right.
So the fact that this was going on in the first place was hush-hush. It was not being divulged in the media or anything else. But the soldiers knew. In Vietnam, word would spread. So,
right.
We amongst ourselves knew what was going on. We got no outside appreciation. And that's kind of stuck with me for the better part of 50 years. That we went through something horrendous. It was a major, major battle in Vietnam that no one knows about. And when the documentary on Vietnam,
Well, the Ken Burns one?
Ken Burns,
Yeah.
and to me, Ripcord was a key part of what was going on during that hush-hush thing.
Yeah.
So I bought the whole collection of the Vietnam War, and I keep waiting for Ripcord, and it never happened. It's like, well, I guess we still didn't happen. It's just something that happened and didn't happen.
Right.
So, but getting back to earlier, so I got out of Fort Benning because my Vietnam service cleared me from having to do any follow-up, what is it,
Reserve duty? Or?
Reserve, thank you. Yeah, because normally after your 2 years, you would be responsible for 2 years of having a report for reserve duty and then another inactive reserve. But that was waived because of my Vietnam service. So therefore, I was pretty much clear and free of my military obligation. And I just wanted to clear my head and put it behind me, thinking I could truly do so. And I threw a dart at a map, figuratively speaking, living at home in Sourcewing, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. I said, I need to go somewhere. I need to escape and just relax. And I had been traveling through Salt Lake City, and I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful area of mountains and everything. I loaded up my car and drove out there, and I spent 6 months out there, and thinking that, I'd get a job, which I did, but I was reading an enormous amount of classic literature and just, feeding my brain. But I knew that I wasn't facing things, I wasn't moving ahead, and at that point I realized, I told myself, okay, I need to do one of two things. I need to go back to college, or I need to get some serious help from psychologists, sociologists, or whatever, and put things in perspective. I opted to go back to, Say when.
Okay, so you spent your 6 months in Salt Lake. It's like now it's time to sort out your life.
Now it's time to get real. So I talked to my mother on the phone and said, look, I need to move back home. I've got to either go to college again and try to reintroduce myself to the world, or I need to get serious counseling. So I chose college. I came back, went back to community college, finished up my associate degree, and school was really easy. It's like, wow, this is really simple, I was an art major, but I found myself, and maybe it's due to lack of my art skills, but I really felt compelled to start writing. And I have since discovered that people in wartime, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., are told to write their experiences. It's a form of therapy that helps get it out. If you can't verbalize it, you can write it. Well, I hadn't had those instructions, but I felt compelled to do it anyway. And it really, really, really helped me. And it's a form of exorcism, in essence, to get it out. So I finished my associate degree in '74. Then it wasn't until '79 that I went ahead and completed my education. I went to Memphis State University, which is now the University of Memphis, and finished up there. But even though I continued on with my art studies, I leaned heavily towards creative writing and literature and got involved in that. So, and as you've read, I write these stories about my experiences. I posted on the Ripcord Association Facebook page. Because of that, I get volunteered to be a speaker at the South Carolina State Museum to talk about my experiences, which is very ironic. And as you can see, I'm still emotional about some stuff that's not going to go away. But after keeping silent about it, I hadn't told anybody about my experiences in 50 years. And through writing about it and stuff has helped. But then I become a guest speaker at South Carolina State Museum, and it's like, whoa, I didn't see that coming at all. And I have never been a good public speaker. I used to just panic when I'd have to talk in front of a classroom in high school. But the simple fact of doing that, it gets easier and easier. I can verbalize things. For the most part, I've got a pretty good handle on my experience in Vietnam, and I've done well in life. I spent the last 16 years of my career working for the federal government, I'm retired now, and I can talk about my experiences. I gained a lot of positive things through my experience. One thing that separates me and the rest of us soldiers is you realize how precious life is. I mean, as we found out, that can be stopped in a heartbeat. Instantly, you're dead. And it gives you an appreciation for the fact that you're alive and being able to live experiences that other people were not fortunate enough to do. So I'm pretty happy in life, and life is good, so I got no complaints.
And at what point did you actually start talking about your experiences? You were writing for some time.
I've been writing for a long time. I started writing when I was wrapping up community college. And in recent years, then I've really started writing about segments of my experience in Vietnam. And but it hasn't been until then. I'd say within the last 3 years, I'm verbalizing and talking about it and writing about it. And it's crazy. The stigma of being a Vietnam veteran really bothered me. So therefore, I didn't really state that I was a Vietnam veteran. I have not been one to wear the Vietnam veteran garb, you know, the hats and all this kind of stuff. I still keep it to a minimum. I don't have veteran license plates or stickers on my car. It's something that's private to me. I've kept it in the past. But at the same time, I have a daughter who's now in her 40s, and unlike what happened to me, my dad was a veteran of World War II. I have no clue what he did. I mean, I know that he hit France shortly after D-Day, and his unit marched all the way into Germany by the end of the war. But I know nothing about the particulars, what he had done. I want to leave a legacy, or at least some knowledge for my daughter of what my experiences were. And I do a lot of this for her. And at the same time, by sharing that with her, it helps me too. It helps me to get it out.
And at what point did you connect with Ripcord Association?
I was somewhere around 2000 or so. I was in a bookstore. They had a huge magazine section, and I could see the title of this magazine was called Vietnam. And the featured article in it was the Battle of Firebase Ripcord. And I thought, that's us. I could count on one hand anything I had heard reference to Firebase Ripcord in all these years. There's a gentleman, I think his name is John Del Vecchio. He's an author of the 13th Valley. He made little references to Firebase Ripcord in that book, but it's few and far between. And when I saw this magazine about Ripcord, it's like, wow. And I think it stated something about the Ripcord Association in there. I started, and I was new to the computer. Hey, look, you can look up information, you know. So I found out about the group. I found out that at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, they were going to be doing a ceremony for Lieutenant Bob Kalsu. They were naming, I think it's a processing center, dedicating it in his name. It's like, I'm going to go up there because I live in Atlanta, Georgia now. I'm getting ready to move to Tucson. But that's not a bad drive from Atlanta up to Fort Campbell. So I went up there, and it was the first time I met some of these guys. At that point, there was no one there that I knew. But as people find out through the Ripcord Association, you become fast friends with people really quick because you've got this common bond. I met Keith Nolan, who wrote the book about Ripcord, and went to dinner with he and his girlfriend, and got to know him a little bit. It was really tragic that he died not too many years afterwards. But It was a good experience. General Petraeus was the speaker at this ceremony, which was interesting. But then it was shortly after that that I went to my first reunion, and that was at Colorado Springs, and where I actually ran into people that I'd been over there with and got to know them. But I've been a real active member ever since. So it's been 20-some years now that I've been involved with these guys, and made a lot of friendships, and we're going to have that bond.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly glad you have done that, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to share the story.
Yeah, thank you so much.